Hello, my name is Mr. Hoven, and today we are going to be talking about the railroads. If you remember from last time, we were talking about the industrialization of the United States and the use of all those raw materials such as water, such as iron, such as copper and timber to begin the country down the road to industrializing. And with that comes the expansion of railroads. That's right, you heard it correctly. Railroads. We use the railroads to use the goods to get the people to the products and the products to the people. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, in 1865, the United States had about 35,000 miles of railroad track. Almost all of it was east of the Mississippi River. And after the Civil War, railroad construction expanded dramatically, linking the distant regions of the nation in a transportation network. So as industrialization begins to spring up and take place, and the nation expands, more rail line is needed. Some of it's for just shipping people out. Others connecting different areas of the United States, because if you remember from last lesson, many of the natural resources were out west. So you had to get those natural resources to the factories in the east to be processed and made into products for people to use. And by 1900, the U.S. boasted over 200,000 miles of railroad track. Now, one of the acts that really ushers in this railroad movement, or the construction of all these railroads, was the Pacific Railway Act. And this began in 1862, and it was signed by President Abraham Lincoln. This act provided for the construction of a transcontinental railroad, basically transcontinental across the continent, spanning from the East Coast in New York City to the West Coast in California. So this transcontinental idea is a railway between two companies that were creating it that span from one coast to the other. And the two corporations that were enlisted to create this railway were the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroad Companies. And to encourage rapid construction, the government offered each company land along its right-of-way. So along the tracks that you were building, if you were part of that company, you would be able to own many parts of the land along the railway. Well, that could lead into some problems, especially with Native Americans. Keep in mind, they had been living on this land for hundreds of years. And now with this new land grant system, people who are just starting to break ground heading west get to have that land? I think that could lead to some problems down the line. But intense competition rose between the two companies, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads, as they each sought to obtain as much public land and as much money as possible. So the Union Pacific Railroad was under the direction of engineer Grenville Dodge, who was a former Union general. And this company, the Union Pacific, began pushing westward from Omaha, Nebraska in 1865. It employed about 10,000 workers, most of them Irish immigrants and African Americans. There were also some Civil War veterans and ex-convicts that took part in building this company's railroad. The laborers faced blizzards in the mountains, scorching heat in the desert, and sometimes angry Native Americans. I wonder why they might be angry. Labor, money, and engineering problems plagued the supervisor of this project. It was very difficult to get this company up and running. While most of the laborers camped along the line, so the laborers, as they worked, they would camp along the rail line, about a fourth of them would sleep 3 deep in bunk beds on rolling board cars. Camp life, as it was building the railroad, was rough, dirty, dangerous. Lots of gambling, hard drinking, and fighting. And their competition. The competing company to get as far across the nation as possible was the Central Pacific Railway. This began as the dream of the engineer Theodore de Hone Judah. And he sold stock in this small company as it began to grow to people we would call known as the Big Four. The Big Four. For instance, he sold stock in his company to a grocer named Leland Stanford, a shop owner, Charlie Crocker, a hardware store owner, Mark Hopkins, and another hardware store owner known as Collis P. Huntington. These so-called Big Four eventually made huge fortunes from their investment. Leland Stanford became governor of California and later served as a United States senator after founding the Stanford University in 1885. So has anyone heard of Stanford University? I wonder where it got its name. Leland Stanford. Because of a shortage of labor in California, because again, this company started in California and worked its way east to meet the Union Pacific, which was headed west from Omaha, Nebraska. The Central Pacific Railroad hired about 10,000 workers from China. All the equipment, rails, cars, locomotives, and machinery was shipped from the east, either around Cape Horn at the tip of South America or over the Isthmus of Panama in Central America. So you've got two companies fighting to get as far as they can, and they will eventually meet in the middle. So when this transcontinental railway was completed, so when we had a rail line that ran from the East Coast to the West Coast, this occurred on May 10th, 1869. It was completed. A Chinese crew was chosen to lay the final 10 miles of track, which was completed in only 12 hours. The two sets of track met at Promontory Summit in Utah Territory. Leland Stanford, governor of California, drove a final golden spike into the tie to join the two railroads. Almost as the event occurred, telegraph lines flashed. The news across the country, the last rail laid, the last spike driven, the Pacific Railroad is complete. Now the movement of goods, of people, and with those people, ideas, customs, and culture could be transferred from one end of the country to another. Keep in mind, what do you think might have happened to that final golden spike? Would they leave it in, or maybe they took it out quickly? So the railroads expanded. It wasn't just one rail line that went from East Coast to West Coast or West Coast to East Coast. They spurred quite a bit of growth. And this growth, had a vast impact on people. Expansion of more railroads across the nation spurred American industrial growth. Industry was able to grow because now more goods were being shipped from the West. Those raw materials, those natural resources were sent east to the factories to be processed and used. And as the nation was linked together, the size of markets for products grew. So more people are buying products that are being created. And railroads helped the economy because companies were spending money on steel, coal, timber, and other resources. And one of the really interesting things that was created around the railroads, which still impacts us today, was the idea of time zones. So railroads even changed how people measured time. Before the 1880s, each community kept its own time based on the sun's position at noon. Clocks in Boston, for example, were 11 minutes ahead of clocks in New York City. And having local time zones for each town, so each town has a different time at a given time of day, interfere with train scheduling. And at times even threaten passenger safety, because if you've got two trains coming in to a station from opposite directions at different times, they think, but it's really the same time, they have an accident. It's pretty dangerous. So, and they were traveling along the same track, collisions could result from scheduling errors caused by differences in timekeeping. People died, people got hurt. To make rail service across the country safer and more reliable, the American Railway Association, an organization included the nation's railroad companies, divided the country into 4 time zones in 1883. So you had the Eastern time zone, pictured here in orange, the Central in light green, the Mountain time zone in purple, and the Pacific time zone in red. All of the communities located within a time zone would share the same time. And each zone was exactly 1 hour later than the zone to its west. So for instance, if it is 1 o'clock here in the Eastern time zone, it is actually noon here in the Central time zone. So they're 1 hour behind us. So these time zones really helped with scheduling, and they still impact us today because we still have time zones throughout the United States and throughout the world. And meanwhile, new locomotive technology and the invention of air brakes enabled railroads to pull longer and heavier trains on their lines. When combined with large, well-organized railroad systems, operations became so efficient that the average cost per mile for a ton of freight dropped from 2 cents in 1860 to 3/4 of a cent in 1900, thus making shipping through rail much more cost-efficient and faster than it would be on canals or waterways. The nationwide rail network also helped unite Americans in different regions. The Omaha Daily Republican newspaper in Nebraska observed in 1883 that railroads had made the people of this country homogeneous, alike, breaking the peculiarities and the provincialisms, local ways, which mark separate and unmingling regions. Now, this was a bit of an exaggeration. I mean, come on now. People weren't all exactly alike. But it recognized that railroads were changing American society, bringing people from different cultures, different belief systems, and different backgrounds into contact with one another. So, in a way, the railroads were helping spread this cultural diffusion, and that means the spread of ideas, culture, belief systems, religions. People are becoming more aware that their way of life isn't the only one. So again, railroads have had a huge impact on the industry, the economy, and the culture of America. So we're going to wrap things up there for today. Next time, we're going to look more into the railroads and their impact on the farmers, and later on, the impact all this construction of the railroads had on Native Americans. Again, this was their land we were coming onto, and we were just laying claim to it. They had been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Just something to keep in mind over the next week in class, and we'll see you next time.